Lisa. It's a pleasure to be in Ohio. Whoa, I won't do that. I won't do that again. Won't walk. I like to be part of the audience, but I guess I won't do that. It's a pleasure to be in Ohio. I'm excited about the work that you all are doing here. I'm excited that the Learning Accelerator chose Ohio, not least of which because I think it may mean, Lisa, you can travel a little bit less in the year ahead. But I'm excited about the work that all the partners here are doing with the Ohio Blended Learning Network and really bringing people together to think about this. I also want to acknowledge my friend Brian Bridges back there, who's working with us on taking a lot of the work that he's done in California in terms of understanding what is actually the state of blended learning on the ground in schools, and further developing that survey instrument so that we can get a really good understanding of what's happening here, so that as the various partners come around and districts and schools work together, we can get a better sense for what are the supports needed that are actually useful to advancing student-centered learning ultimately in this state. The last thing I'll say is, and I just want to echo something you said up front, which is, sure, blended provides a roadmap to think through the design of blended learning, but I think what you'll see is just as there's no one way to educate a student, there's no one way to construct a school, design a blended learning environment, run a district, or a state. There's no one size fits all in any of these things. We're tailoring all of these experiences to meet the needs of our individual communities so that we can best serve the students and their particular needs. And those vary from places to places. So what Reynoldsburg is going to do is going to look different from what Cincinnati and Cleveland and so forth are eventually going to do as well, and to say nothing of how other states will unfold. So particularly excited that you bring that wisdom into this experience from the get-go. What I thought I would do today with just the limited time we have together in this particular presentation is a few things. One, the video was a great introduction to what is blended learning. I just want to put a little bit more structure around that and get a little specific. I'm going to be very brief on that overview of blended learning and the what. And then I just want us to talk for a couple minutes about the why of blended learning. Why should we care about this? Because my observation is a lot of times, not just in education, but everywhere, we get really obsessed with the thing and we forget about the why. Why should we be doing this? And then where I'll spend the bulk of my talk is just very briefly summarizing the themes from Blended itself, which is the how, and how do we realize the promise of this why behind blended learning. And then if we have some time and I don't get kicked off, I'd love to take a few questions, so we'll see where things stand. So without further ado, blended learning really stemmed from this trend of online learning, which started growing around in K-12 schools around 1997, really the turn of the century. And in Disrupting Class, we made this crazy prediction that by 2019, 50% of all high school courses would be online in some form or fashion. And Brian actually will tell you in his survey work that we're not as crazy as people thought we were when that book originally came out. It's tracking, but what we've seen is that the majority of the growth of this online learning is in brick and mortar schools, right? 90% of students, our research has shown, need the custodial care, the other students, the teacher supports that come in these schools in our communities. And so the majority of people are going to be doing online learning in schools, which is fundamentally what we're talking about when we're talking about K through 12 blended learning. Now we have a complicated definition for what blended learning is. I'm going to go over it, but then I'll simplify it, okay? So our definition is a formal education program where someone's learning online, at least in part, and the key part of the phrase is that students have some control over the time, the place, the path, and or the pace of their learning. The second element is it's at least in part in a supervised brick and mortar location away from home, so we might call that a school with teachers. And then the modalities along each student's learning path are connected somehow, meaning that what you do offline in a given subject connects to what you're doing online. These aren't disparate experiences. And the way I think of this is that when I was growing up and teachers got sick of me in class and would kick me out to do some Oregon Trail, that wasn't blended learning, okay? So the Oregon Trail experience had nothing to do with what I was doing in math or reading and so forth. And blended learning is integrating these different modalities along a student's path. So basically, it's just that. It's online learning in schools, and the different activities you do have to have some intentionality behind them. The important thing is it shifts some of that control to the student. It starts to give them some ownership over that learning, which is critical to the lifelong learning journey that all of us have in the years ahead, and the importance of which has only grown. You'll notice one other thing about this definition, which is it doesn't say blended learning is good, right? It doesn't say blended learning is the best of or something like that. That's very intentional, because we do see some pretty poor implementations of blended learning that don't do things for students. And it goes again to that why. Why should we care about this element of it that I'll get into in just another moment? We see blended learning taking shape in lots of different ways across the country. We've done our best to talk with lots of educators in the field and try to categorize these in some ways that just give educators a language to say, hey, I'm doing a rotation model, you're doing a flex model, and that imparts something about the implementation on the ground and how teachers and students are interacting. This is a confusing chart that captures that taxonomy. It basically says brick and mortar schools meet online learning at the top there, and they have a baby known as blended learning. And then blended learning has several offspring that manifests itself in these different instructional models. I'll just showcase a couple of them that we're seeing that are pretty popular across the country right now. Station rotation model is a very popular form of blended learning, and I would argue it has its roots in the centers-based learning that have gone on in elementary school for decades and decades. But basically now one of those centers becomes online learning, right? And students are rotating at fixed points in time among different stations, small groups with teacher-led instruction perhaps, collaborative activities and project-based learning perhaps, and the online learning where it starts to inform what happens at those other students, gives teachers the ability to sort students into different groups depending on their objectives and so forth. And this is what it looks like sometimes on the ground. This is an elementary school in Los Angeles, California, that implemented station rotation model. You see they had a class size of 30 to 1. They wanted small group instruction so that the teacher could personalize much more. 9, 10 students on the rug with the teacher doing really the workshop model of small group learning. And then you have students in the back doing some some online learning. And what's not pictured is there are another 10 students off doing some collaborative activities with each other. Another one that we talk a lot about is the flex model of blended learning. And I've put a picture here of what this looks like in a school called the Flex Academies, actually out of California. And you can see that there's sort of this collaborative study space where students have their individual offices with their computers where they can learn online, and then all these different breakout experiences where they can move flexibly and fluidly through their learning as meets their needs. What's different about this is that student agency, there's a lot more of it, right? It's a much more flexible and fluid and trending toward even more personalization path, but it's also more complicated because the station rotation helps you say, hey, every 30 minutes or whatever you decide, we're going to rotate to a new activity. It can be difficult to coordinate how do we get a group together for a project if you haven't thought that through, and so the level of execution can be harder here as well. This is what it looks like on the ground out of Summit Public Schools, a school in California and moving into the state of Washington as well. Looks a lot like the modern workforce open learning spaces, or excuse me, open workspaces that you would see. Very different from a classroom. And I actually never use the word classroom to describe these sorts of spaces because I think it goes beyond that. So the question then, of course, is why should we care about all this, right? And my sense is that online learning really is the first scalable pathway we've ever seen to realize student-centered learning for all students. And I define student-centered learning, and Heather and I worked on this quite a bit, really is the combination of personalized learning meeting competency-based learning. And our sense is that to do these things well, online or blended learning is going to be absolutely critical, because in order to do student-centered learning, and actually let me define it a little bit more simply, because all of these terms have various ideologies of all stripes attached to them, and I don't really deal with ideologies very well. I think of it, student-centered learning, as the right learning experience, whatever that might be, for the student at the right time. whatever it is to help them be successful, they get that experience, whether it's individual or group work or whatnot. They're able to tune into that particular experience is the way I think of it. And the challenge is, before online learning, the best way to do that was through a tutor for every child, and we just know that that has not proved particularly scalable. So online learning starts to change and give students ownership over these pathways and change the way teachers interact with students to free them up to play that role of tutor in many cases, as well as many other roles that are so critical for student success. Now, schools, I think, are adopting it for 3 reasons that we see in the field. One of them is personalization. They really want to be able to reach and meet each student where he or she is, knowing that each student does not progress through their learning at the same pace, certainly, and that every child brings in different background knowledge into an experience, which can totally change how you interact with learning at any time, right? The second reason is access and equity. Really this drive to deliver a high quality learning experience in really any subject or material possible, regardless of zip code. The ability to deliver a highly qualified, a highly effective teacher to anyone, anywhere, and highly engaging academic content or experiences is just really exciting through this mode. And then the third one is cost control. The challenge of doing tutoring is just that. It's really, really expensive, but we can bring these benefits of personalization and access and equity at a cost we can afford, which is what's so exciting, I think, for so many schools that are moving in this direction. Now, this is where I want to spend the bulk of my time, and the bulk of the new book is really focused on the how. How do we seize this potential that I think people are so excited about? And the first thing is to actually move away from the technology completely. Stop thinking about this as a technology problem completely, and just, again, a lot of people obsess on the thing, the gadgets or the software or this, and it's just not the secret sauce. Really what I would encourage people to do is figure out why you're doing this. We call it a smart rallying cry, but what we mean by that is pick a meaningful problem that you're struggling with as a school or district, a meaningful goal, aspirational that you want to achieve, some sort of opportunity for which you need a solution where blended learning perhaps can be helpful, and really make that your driving reason to start designing something that will benefit students. So some of these problems that you might identify, we would say, are in the core academic areas. So for example, you want to provide high school teachers more time to give individual feedback on writing assignments. Okay? That might be one problem statement. Another one might be, we want to boost the actual academic reading results as measured by test scores, say. Other problems are what we call non-consumption problems. They're problems outside of the core academic areas in educational experiences that you want to be able to offer, but for any number of reasons, teacher shortages, budget cuts, whatever, you can't offer it. So you might lack specific subject matter teachers. For example, 19% of high schools in this country don't offer Algebra 2. Think about that for a moment, and we need to be solving that. And then another one might be help students recover units and get back on track for graduation. The key is to state whatever your goal or problem is, state the success of that in a way that's measurable and time-bound. So, for example, you might say, our goal is to raise school math performance by 10 percentage points by this year. It doesn't have to be baked around test scores, but it has to be quantifiable so that you as a team can say, we are or are not on track for that, and we can adjust accordingly to make this work, okay? After you've done that rallying cry, the part that I think a lot of people miss is organizing the team around this. And I was so glad to hear earlier say, like, we got a team of people doing this, because blended learning is a team sport. It's not about an individual actor just making this happen, or one particularly visionary leader causing this to happen. It's a team sport, and what we see out in the field is a lot of people will say, oh yeah, we know technology is important, and we know it only works if we get professional development. All of that is true, but I will tell you that the type of professional development you get really depends on the instructional model you're going to be putting in place, and to design that instructional model, you're going to need a team of people to come together and make it work. we talk a lot more about this in the book, but for now, I just want to leave it there. Is really you're going to try to find the right team to address the problem that you're trying to solve. The third step is when you actually start to design the student experience itself. And I'm going to tell a story about this from our theory-based work on innovation, but before I do so, what I'd encourage when we're thinking about designing the student experience is literally throw out all of the school schedules, all of the things that are trappings of the current school, and just literally write the word student on a piece of paper or at the center of a whiteboard and say, like, what should student learning look like to realize our goals and aspirations as a society and as a school, but also understand how to motivate students so that they'll want to reach for those aspirations and be in line with us. And it turns out that motivation is just a critical piece of this, because so many students in school, you know, what's the number one thing that they'll say? They're bored, right? So how do we turn them on so that they want to do these things that we know are so important for their future life success? And it turns out from our research on innovation more broadly that there's a way to think about this that defies the conventional sort of ways of thinking about marketing or stuff like that, that I would actually tell you dooms over 80% of products that companies like Procter & Gamble, to name an Ohio-based one, historically have developed that actually fail out of the gate because they don't understand what people are actually trying to do in their lives. They don't understand what we call the job to be done. And so I'll just give a silly little story about this of what job do people hire milkshakes to do? And it's a pressing public policy problem of our time, undoubtedly, but there was a fast food company in the 1990s that wanted to improve the sale of milkshakes. And so what they did was they called in a bunch of marketing consultants and said, you know, how do we improve this? And so they did focus groups with the average demographic most likely to buy a milkshake, called them into a room, did a focus group, said how should we improve it, got feedback, made changes, literally sales didn't budge. So a different group of folks up in Detroit actually came in, and they took a very different approach. They asked themselves, what job do people hire milkshakes to do? And they stood at the back of the restaurant one day, and for literally 18 hours, they just took copious notes of any time someone came in and bought a milkshake. What time of day was it? What were they wearing? What else did they buy? Were they with anyone else? Did they consume the milkshake in the restaurant or outside? On and on and on. And at the end of the day, they saw some interesting things. 80% of milkshakes were sold at 2 distinct times during the day. 50% were sold during the early morning rush hour commute, kind of gross. 30% were sold in the late afternoon. They noticed a couple other things. On that 50% group that were buying these milkshakes in the early morning, every single one of them would come into this restaurant by themselves. They would buy only a milkshake, and they never drank it inside of the restaurant. They would always go outside of their car, drive off with the milkshake in hand. And so the next day, the guy who did this research came back and he stood outside the restaurant. And when people left with the milkshake in hand, he confronted them and said, excuse me, in language that they would understand, when you just hired that milkshake, what job were you trying to do? And they stepped back and said, I have no idea what you're talking about. And he said, well, think about the last time you were in this situation doing whatever it is you're doing right now. What else did you buy? And they said, you know, I think I get what you're saying. You see, I've got a 20 to 30 minute drive to work right now. And I'm not starving now, but I know if I don't put something in my stomach, I'll be starving by 9:30 or so. And this morning commute actually turns out to be pretty freaking boring. So I want something to kind of occupy myself and keep me awake as I'm driving. And come to think of it, I hired bagels last week. But take it from me, bagels don't do the job well at all, because they're dry and kind of tasteless unless you live in New York City, in which case you're not driving anywhere, you're just taking the subway everywhere. They crumb all over your suit pants. If you want to make them taste good, you got to spread cream cheese or jam on them, which means you start driving with your knees while you're doing so. And if the cell phone rings, you got big problems. I hired donuts once, but true story, I had to lie to my wife about it because we're not supposed to eat donuts in the morning, and it wasn't a believable lie because when she got in the car later that day, the steering wheel was totally gummed up and sticky and so forth. I hired bananas, but that was actually the worst of all things because the stupid banana was gone in 30 seconds and I was starving by 10 o'clock. But it turns out that when I hire this milkshake, it just does the job perfectly. I actually have no idea what they put in the thing. But it's so thick and viscous, it takes forever to suck up that tiny little straw that it easily lasts me my 20 or 30 minutes. And again, I have no idea what they put in it, but it sinks to the bottom of my stomach and easily keeps me full until about 11:30, perfect for lunch. And you know, God gave me two hands. I've always put one hand on the steering wheel, never knew what to do with this one, but there's this cup holder here. And it just fits in. It just fits perfectly, right? And so it turned out that the milkshake did the morning commute job better than its competitors, which weren't just other milkshakes from, say, Wendy's and Burger King and McDonald's, but those things plus bananas, donuts, bagels, coffee, Snickers bars, on and on and on, you name it, right? And so if we step back, actually let me just quickly tell you, in the late afternoon, those 30% that would come in and buy the milkshake, same demographic coming in. But this time they came in with their kids. And basically what would happen was they would buy like the Happy Meal or the burger or whatever. And then you get the tug on the jacket from your kid saying, "Dad, can't I have a milkshake?" And you just wanted to feel like you said no all week long to your child so many times that you just wanted to feel like a good dad. That you would say, "Sure, son, you can have the milkshake." And then you'd sit down at the restaurant, eat the burger, and it was so thick and viscous for consuming that milkshake that at some point this little kid trying to chug this thing just became impossible, and you'd give up and throw it out half consumed, and temper tantrums resulted. And so the feedback to improve the milkshake was totally different depending on which job it was hired for, okay? So we'll come back to that thought in a moment, but I just wanted to quickly go over that. When you think about schools, it turns out that school is not a job that students are hiring to do. That may be shocking, but I suspect for educators it's not. School is a thing, right, that they go to learn, but it's not a job that they actually have in their lives. It's not something that motivates them intrinsically. And as we studied the question, what we realized is that the primary jobs that students have are to experience success and make progress in their lives, really each and every day, and to have fun with friends. And a lot of the opportunities for success in schools occur when assessments are given out, right? Because you can get clear feedback on how you did. But assessments only occur every, say, 3-4 weeks in a given subject. And most of the time they're graded on a curve, so it's designed to make a lot of people feel like failures in the class. And extracurricular activities where you can experience success, like arts or sports and things like that, we call them extracurricular because we separate them from the core schooling experience itself. And so as a result, school actually makes a lot of kids often feel like failures on a daily basis, or doesn't give them those opportunities to even have success. And secondly, to have fun with friends, we actually often in the classroom environment are trying to stop people from having fun with friends, when actually school is a really critical place where they develop these social relationships. I'll go more into this in a moment, but the question is, of course, how do you design then an experience to take into account the job to be done? And what we've learned in studying this is that there's 3 levels in the architecture of a job. The first one is that fundamental job to be done, that morning commute, keep me not bored job that we were talking about before. To deliver on that, you have to figure out what are all the experiences that we need to provide to do this job perfectly. So just take a quick example on the milkshake. You would say, you know, are we delivering it in the right way? Are we messaging it in the right way? Do we have the right ingredients in the milkshake? Is it in the right receptacle? Does it have to be in something totally different to get the job done? On and on and on. And as you've understood these, then you say, okay, these are the physical things that we need to put in place and integrate in a certain way to deliver on that. And so in the case of the morning milkshake, what you would do is say, actually, let's move the dispenser that creates the milkshakes to the front of the line, give people a prepaid swipe card maybe, so they can dash in, gas up, and just keep on going with their day. You'd actually make the early morning milkshake even thicker so that it certainly would last through the day, or excuse me, through the drive. And then you might actually stir in tiny pieces of fruit, right? And the reason would not be to make it healthy, because no matter what they tell you, these people are not caring about the health factor here. But instead, they'll be driving along and they'll swallow a fruit chunk every once in a while and say, gee, that was interesting, and it sort of keeps them awake, right? So, and in the late afternoon, you design something very differently. And so the question is, how would you do this for schools so that we can get our jobs done? And I just want to give a quick case study of Summit Public Schools in California that I think has done a really good job of rethinking that student experience. And for Summit Public Schools, their job is how to make sure students achieve lifelong success. That's their mission. And they feel like you gotta have 4 different things to do that. One of these is content knowledge. Another piece is habits of success in terms of living life. A third one is experiences that are much broader in terms about what are possibilities for what you do when you grow up and connecting it to experiences outside the classroom. And then a fourth one is the cognitive skills to be successful in these endeavors, okay? So to get their job done, what they've said is that there's actually 8 experiences that we have to provide students. We've got to give students more agency and ownership over their work so that they have better opportunity to feel success. We've got to give them the opportunity to move on once they've individually mastered something, so that success is inherent actually in the school design. We have to give them actionable data and rapid feedback so that they know how they're doing constantly and they can constantly calibrate to feel those mini opportunities of success. Transparency and learning goals. We need sustained periods of quiet, solitary reading time so that they can do the deep reading necessary to feel those opportunities of success and succeed. Meaningful work experience, both in projects but also outside of the classroom. Mentoring experiences, opportunities to have fun with friends and so forth. And positive group experiences where you have opportunities to have fun with friends. Okay? And the way that they've integrated that, they've created this thing with Activate, which are individual playlists of material where students literally tailored for their individual needs can pick the right way for them to learn a particular learning content standard. They have this learning success goal as wrapped into the 16 hours of personalized learning time, where students are constantly setting goals, planning, learning, showing evidence that they've mastered it, which is that success and progress thing, and then reflecting on that experience as they move into their next goal. They've taken a comprehensive scope and sequence, not just through the grade, but through all of high school, and made that transparent for students. And they give rich, rapid, transparent feedback on assignments through a variety of tools to really help motivate students so that they know how they can do better. And students can keep working and iterating on these things until they've truly mastered something. And then if you look at the day in the life, and I'm going to move past this relatively quickly, there's actually huge chunks of time for project-based learning work and mentorship experiences with teachers on one-on-one time and that, but then small group opportunities to work together. And then they had these 8 weeks per year of expeditions where you get out of the classroom and work with mentors and in work experiences outside of the traditional school to connect these things for students and actually give them a bigger sense of what success would mean. Now, that was the student experience. It's a large part of it because to me this is the part I get the most passionate about. I think it's really critical to think through what are the student experiences we need to provide. And I would tell you, Summit hasn't nailed it. Everyone's going to have to figure out a different way to serve their students, but I'm just trying to give a way to think through this. The next part of this is designing the teacher experience. And we have in the book itself, we give a lot of frameworks for thinking our way through this. But I would just submit this question as you're thinking about the environments you're creating, which is to ask yourself, what's the best use of face-to-face time when we can deliver content and instruction online? Do we really want to be doing whole group lesson planning and delivering a lecture? Or do we want to be using teachers as mentors, facilitators, tutors, evaluators of student work in much deeper ways, school counselors, Socratic discussion guides, project-based learning experts, on and on and on. To that end, we're seeing a lot of schools in the field think about how do we motivate teachers themselves, right? It's not just student jobs that we have to get done. We have to get teacher jobs done and make this a rewarding profession. And so they're doing things like extending the reach of great teachers so that you can teach more students, allowing for specialization in the parts that you're passionate about in the job, team teaching so that you can bounce off people. You got someone that just really wants to be a data geek and go deep into the software, and you got another teacher that, you know, quite frankly isn't that into the data but really wants to work one-on-one with students using what they've heard that they need to work on. But, you know, the data and analyzing spreadsheets and stuff like that, just not all that interesting. Awards for achievement, just the way I would say this actually is just as we need personalized learning for students, we need personalized learning for teachers too, so that they can improve their own craft based on where they are and where their strong suits are and their goals in the profession, and the opportunities for micro-credentialing as students, as teachers make progress themselves in mastering the craft is an exciting opportunity. And then granting more authority to teachers and teams of teachers to create these environments is a critical part of this as well. So we've gone through a large part of this design process and not mentioned technology yet. So now here's where the technology starts to come in. Once we've figured out what's that ideal student and teacher experience look like, totally whiteboarded it, now we map it back to what content or software are we going to use, the technology available, the facilities, and so forth. And so part of this is the ideal, like what's the ideal content, technology, facilities going to do for us? And part of this is the rubber meets the road. This is also what we have available. Like if you're, I was just talking earlier, you have a BYOD district, that means you have certain devices already and capabilities. So that's your reality. So to some extent you're crosswalking and iterating now between these grand visions of student and teacher experience with reality to design. And so when you're thinking about content, these are 12 considerations. We'll make these slides available so you can go into them later. The technology, I would say, make sure you're constantly crosswalking what can the technology do with the software you're thinking about, right? If you're going to do a Flash-based software tool, don't get an iPad, right? So think about these compatibility issues. And then facilities, we're just seeing tremendous innovation right now in facilities. There's not enough thought about how do you create ideal learning experiences for students and teachers, I would argue. There's too many people passing school bond measures and then just building a traditional school, rather than asking what would schooling look like in the future. And I would say that the best use of brick and mortar space isn't around the rows of chairs and teacher at the front, and irony that I'm lecturing right now, noted, but you know, safe, clean, inspiring, available and flexible spaces I think are absolutely critical. And what we're seeing, at least in the field, is that some of these spaces, this is intrinsic schools in Chicago, are unbelievably gorgeous, I think, and rewarding for students and look very different. You can see the spaces are very flexible and different for different types of activities for students, and they're actually less money to build these than traditional spaces, which I think is super interesting as you go through this. And this is what it looks like on the ground. I'm going to blow through the last part of this book, or excuse me, this sort of design process, just for the sake of time. But after you've fit all these pieces together, now you're going to hunker down into an instructional model itself. This is when you'll say, we're doing a station rotation, or we're going to do a lab rotation. It's sort of where you meet the reality of what you have with the experiences you want and come up with this model itself. And then a critical thing is to really shape the culture intentionally of how you want students and teachers to act on a daily basis in these new environments. Our experience is that culture is critical in any environment for schools, a culture of success and high expectations, of course, but it's actually even more important in blended learning environments because you're starting to shift more and more control and agency to students, and you want to set expectations of how you deal with problems when they arise and how you prioritize your processes and so forth. So spending a lot of time on this is really important. Finally, this is when you start to test and learn, right? Discovery-driven framework. The one thing I would say, and it goes for me too, is we should all have humility that we do not know what the perfect schooling experience looks like. Whatever we design on paper, just like anytime a teacher does a lesson for the first time, there's going to be some unexpected occurrences. So this is a process we call discovery-driven planning to basically try to minimize the riskiness. Because when you're innovating with students, you know, there's this do no harm ethos that's tremendously important, but we also know if we don't innovate, we're gonna be doing harm as well. So prioritizing the assumptions that you're uncertain about in this innovation is absolutely critical, and then figuring out a way that you can test really quickly and learn which of these will and won't work, and then iterate accordingly, adjust your plan accordingly, and start small, but then really start scaling as assumptions start proving true, then double down, and keep coming back and saying, are these things still proving true? Are we on the right track at every point in time? And that's sort of in brief how I think a roadmap to attack the design process of blended learning, but I think that you can see out of this, everyone is going to result in very different designs for very different student populations and dealing with very different realities. So I hope it's useful to you. I'm excited to keep engaging with Ohio through this work. And I think, not just because you live here, Lisa, but I think you couldn't have picked a more exciting place, a more exciting state to pioneer this work. I'll give a shout out again to Reynoldsburg being this district that's pioneering to flip the whole world to blended learning. I think is really exciting. And Ohio's just been a leader in these digital innovations for a long time. If we can now push this toward a higher quality for every single student, I think the opportunity is enormous right now. So I'm excited to be part of this effort, and the Christensen Institute as well. And
please join me in thanking Michael Horn. Appreciate it.